Greetings and welcome. My name is Jack and this is the second part of the beginner's guide for the Pathfinder 2nd edition wizard, where we complete last week's wizard build by taking a look at the spell Snapshot. That is to say, we look at level 1, 6, 11, 16 and 20 and see what the spell selection for these levels are. If you want to know about the original build, you can check out the first video, which I linked in the description below. And with that being said, let's get into the Snapshot. Okay, at level 1, let's start with the cantrips as usual. And here I'm going to do exactly the same things that I did for the sorcerer. So Electric Arc for our main damage cantrip, Scatter Scree for the second damaging effect as an alternative to Electric Arc, probably Light since we don't have Dark Vision, Shield as a defensive option, and certainly Detect Magic because we are wizards. Finally, our school spell allows us to choose between these necromancy cantrips. We might be stuck only with Chill Touch if our DM does not allow us to take these two uncommon choices. If we aren't, I would take Torturous Trauma for a damage cantrip which targets Fortitude instead of Reflex. So when we are facing enemies against which Scatter Scree or Electric Arc are not very reliable, we can use this as a fallback option. The necromancy cantrips are not that exceptional though. And here we have our 3 level 1 spell slots. One of them is a necromancy spell, and we will pick Animate Dead. We are necromancers and we are planning to summon undead as much as possible. We might prepare it a second time if we want, or we can just prepare a couple of magic weapon, which is arguably the best use of a spell slot at first level. Now, what exactly can we summon with this Animate Dead? If we go to the Archives of Amiethys, the page for Animate Dead is very helpful because it doesn't just give us the description of the spell, but it also shows the options. We can summon level -1 undead that are common. The first one, which is a good potential option, is the Crawling Hand. This creature has a claw attack with a +7 modifier, and it deals 1d4 +1 slashing damage plus grab. So it's automatically a grabber, and the enemy has to choose whether they remain grabbed or if they want to use their action to get rid of this grab. So it's a very nice debuffer, annoying character. Now it only has 8 HP and 12 armor class, so it's probably going to die in one hit, but it can waste around 2 actions. So at level 1, using a spell to waste potentially 2 enemy action doesn't feel too bad. An alternative option, if we want our summon to last a bit more, we could summon a Skeleton Guard. This creature can attack with a short bow with a +6 modifier and deals 1d6 piercing damage with a range increment of 60 feet. So if the enemy wants to get rid of them, they might have to stride towards them. If they don't have ranged attacks themselves, of course the HP is even lower. So once they are in melee, they're probably not going to last much at all. And finally, another very interesting option is the Zombie Shambler. Now, the Zombie Shambler has a permanent effect, which is slow. So this is permanently slowed 1. Slowed 1 means that at the start of their turn, they get 1 less action. Rules as written, this should not matter for summoners because technically summons do not get a turn start. We command them and then they get 2 actions. However, the developers of Pathfinder have clarified that slow does apply to summons. So this means that whenever we command it, they do get only 1 action. This makes the zombie very unappealing because it means that they can only act once. So enemies can just walk around them and ignore the zombie, which cannot use reactions, and even if it could, it doesn't have opportunity attacks. So you would just waste a spell slot and 3 to 4 actions, and then the enemies can just ignore it. So why am I talking about the zombie? Well, because what I said is true if we are fighting an intelligent enemy, but we might be fighting an animal, we might be fighting a construct, we might be fighting other undead, plants, oozes. There are a lot of creatures that are not actually intelligent and will not realize that the best option is to ignore the zombie. And if they decide to focus on the closest enemy, the zombie has a whopping 20 HP at level 1, although the armor class is still low. So it is reasonably survivable for a summon, and it does have a grab attack with a +7 to hit modifier. So it is a more durable control option than the crawling hand, which can also act as a road blocker. In general, all Animate Dead at every level have a zombie option, which has more HP than your regular summon, but suffers from the slowed condition. A skeletal option, which is very fragile and it's more of a damage dealer, quote unquote. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes they have this unique options with particular effects. In this case, the crawling hand's particular effect would be the grab that they can combine with their attack. Of course, the hand does not suffer from the slowed condition, so in case you're fighting intelligent enemies, would probably be a better pick. By considering these three options, you can start to realize why summoning in Pathfinder 2nd edition is not considered that exceptional. You use all three of your actions to create this creature, which is not as good as you are. It's very squishy, it's very vulnerable, and if the enemy attacks them, then you just wasted your spell slot and 3 actions to basically do nothing. Summons are nowhere near as powerful as player characters, nowhere near as powerful as animal companions. So why would you waste time with them? Well, there are a number of unique advantages. First, if the enemy is indeed wasting actions to attack your summon, you are trading your actions against those of the enemy. If you're facing a boss, this might be a good trade. You might be willing to trade your entire turn for one attack of the boss because you can afford it. Your party of 4 to 6 players has so many actions when compared to the boss, and the boss actions are so good that these kind of trades are advantageous to you. Now, of course, once you unlock the slow spell, then that kind of action trade is way more efficient and powerful than your summon. But your summon might still be able to intercept the first attack of your boss, so the one that doesn't have the multiple attack penalty. And maybe the boss low rolls, so they don't crit and they can soak 2 attacks, and then it becomes amazingly good. Again, if you're fighting a boss level creature who is not intelligent, you might be able to waste more of their actions by having them chase around or focus on your summon. And the most important thing to note about the summon spell, and the reason why I like it more than maybe I should, is that it's a very flexible spell slot. As you can see, at level 1 we have these 3 summon options, and we can use them to deal damage, and their damage is comparable to like the second attack of a pet, or even the first attack of the pet in some cases. So it's not great, but it's not terrible. They have some utility effects, and you don't need to use them necessarily for offensive combat. You can use them for crowd control, you can use them as tanks, you can use them outside of combat to explore, interact with the environment. It's a spell that you can be really creative about their application, and so it's very hard to evaluate it. Magic Weapon is very obviously powerful. You use it, you buff your martial, this translates into damage. It's clearly good, but there might be situations where what you need is not to generate more damage, create obstructions in a choke point, or divert some of the enemy forces somewhere else, or obtain flanking bonuses for the martial. The summon can do all of these things on demand, so it's a better spell than it looks, I think. Of course, this is not an optimized level 1 spellcasting list. Still, we have 4 spellcasts per day, which is 1 extra spell than a sorcerer. Pretty nice. Although, if we wanted to make the most out of it, we would probably be something like, well, we could be a transmutation specialist and cast 4-time Magic Weapon, which sounds pretty nuts. And we could have a useful thesis and not spell blending, and we could have like a metamagic feat, like Reach spell, so that we are able to cast this Magic Weapon from a range, so we can stay behind our party and for every single combat, because I wouldn't expect more than 4 combat encounters in your average adventuring day, especially at this low level. We have a very impactful spell option. We have the possibility to deliver it from a safe distance, and then we can resort to casting Electric Arc and maybe doing a cheeky crossbow shot just to add a little bit of damage. But when compared to this quote-unquote more optimal version of the wizard, we are losing the metamagic feat. That doesn't seem like that big of a loss. and we're losing potentially 2 casts of magic weapon. This is probably worse, but what we are trading it for is a very interesting spell, which might in some circumstances even be better than just magic weapon. So right now, I don't feel bad as a caster. I actually feel like a pretty good spellcaster. Let's see how things look like in a couple of levels. Alright, I'm not going to change around the cantrips. I'm going to keep them the same for the entirety of the character build. It is level 6, and we can start spell blending. So, as I said, the school spell slot and another spell slot gets blended, so we can generate an extra level 3 spell slot. We could do this for level 2, but I think that trading 2 level 2 spell slots for a level 3 spell slot, it's kind of a bad trade, and I'm not sure I would take this. So let's just spell blend once and renounce 2 level 1 spell slots for our extra level 3. Magic weapon is useless at this point. For sure, all our marshals are going to have their striking runes in order. So what can we cast at level 1, which is good? Well, a very good level 1 spell, which is always good throughout the game, is Fear. We do not have access to Demoralize. Our charisma is terrible, but we can still use regular magic to frighten enemies. For level 2, here is a very controversial pick. This is Invisibility. Well, it's not controversial, it's pretty obvious. Why do I say it's controversial? Because of the age-old question, how does Invisibility work with summons? Invisibility says, if the target uses a hostile action, the spell ends. And what is a hostile action? The rulebook says that it's an action that can harm or damage another creature, whether directly or indirectly. It also makes 2 examples. If you lob a fireball in a crowd, that's a hostile action. If you open a door and accidentally free a terrible monster, that's not a hostile action. And most importantly, of course, the GM, as always, is the final arbiter on what is or isn't a hostile action. So clearly, if I cast a summon spell, I'm not summoning it for shits and giggles. I'm summoning it to harm other creatures. So that should be a hostile action. What if I sustain a summon spell? Is that a hostile action? Well, I don't know. Technically, the action that causes harm or damage is the action of my summon, not mine. However, if I wasn't sustaining my summon spell and I wasn't commanding my minion would not be harming my enemies. And so, indirectly, I am causing harm with my sustain action. And so, once again, invisibility would break. If you follow this logic, however, it becomes readily apparent that you literally cannot do anything while invisible in combat. If you do something like healing your marshal, how can you possibly consider it a hostile action? Well, if you weren't healing the marshal, then your marshal would be falling unconscious, and since they aren't unconscious as a consequence of your healing, they are able to fight better and to deliver damage to your enemies, therefore harming them. So your healing him or buffing him is an instance of indirect damage to a creature. Intention seemed to be the decisive factor in the example that the developers bring. Yes, once you open a door and you free a creature and that creature starts murdering things, once again you're causing indirect damage. So again, invisibility should stop working. But since you didn't know that behind the door there was a horrible monster, your intention in opening the door was perhaps to flee, which is not a hostile action. And therefore, invisibility works again. Still, even in that situation, if your intention is fleeing, then maybe, unless you're planning to retire from adventuring, if you flee, then you're going to survive. And if you survive, you live to fight another day. And fighting is a hostile action. So if you flee while invisible, by the literal rule, you might eventually indirectly cause harm to the creature you're fleeing from by surviving them and therefore being able to fight them again. So again, a very harsh DM might rule that invisibility just doesn't work. Of course, we are going into the paradoxical at this point, and we're basically saying that invisibility is useless because no matter what you do, it's basically always hostile. Which brings us back to the final point of the hostile action description, which is the GM is the final arbitrator. Ask them what they think about summons. I think that what the developers want, so the intention of the rule is to prevent you from abusing invisibility and inflict damage, quote unquote, while being invisible. And if we acknowledge that, then it becomes clear that you should not be able to summon while invisible. and you should not be able to sustain summons while invisible. Still, I think there are many GMs that would allow you to summon and sustain the summons while invisible, if nothing else because in previous editions of both D&D and Pathfinder, this was 100% a possibility. Regardless of the case, invisibility is still a great spell for scouting and for defense purposes. So getting it as soon as you unlock it is simply a must. It synergizes very well with your familiar, if nothing else. Of course, if you can sustain your summons while invisible, then it becomes better and you might want to prepare it more times. I'm just assuming that that isn't the case, so I'm just preparing it once. But it's certainly a very interesting discussion to have around invisibility and the way it works. And I think this is an instance where the developers were trying to solve once and for all the issue of invisibility abuse. And I'm not sure that they were entirely successful in this because the ruling still seems a bit vague. Speaking of spells that can work in various ways, depending on the tables you're at, let's double down on illusion spells and take Illusory Creature. This is always a good spell, so I kind of always take it when I have the chance. But for this build in particular, the things we can do with Illusory Creature. Now, the enemy knows that we can summon undead, so they expect us to summon them. With Illusory Creature, we can summon undead beyond the challenge rating we would have access to. We can summon liches, we can summon rare undead. Nobody's going to question our ability to summon vampires or stuff like that. We are necromancers and our power level is kind of unknown. We can cheekily alternate between the actual summons and the illusory summons to get the most out of the flexibility of summoning. So with illusory creatures, we can create targets that intelligent enemies cannot afford to ignore unless they figure out it's an illusion. And then once they think we are casting illusions, we can summon the actual summon, one that maybe we do not want to be attacked. And since this intelligent creature is going to assume that, well, that now is an illusion, they might not focus down on our summon, thus indirectly increasing its survivability. The mind games we can do by having this in our arsenal just is very exciting to think of. And I think this is a great option for any summoner, and it marries very well the Necromancer as well. We can have a school spell here, and False Life is a pretty nice necromancy spell. It lasts for 8 hours, and it gives us extra temporary hit points. We are a squishy caster. Any help we can get to survive is pretty good. Level 3 spells. Spellcasters kind of specialize in dealing AoE damage, and we've just very recently unlocked Fireballs, which is kind of the golden standard at this level, I think, of AoE damage. So, you know, summons are not very good damage-wise. So I think this is a weakness we have as a spellcaster, and I'll take a couple of Fireballs to cover it up. Another excellent third level spell, we were talking about wasting actions. Sometimes our summon shenanigans are just not going to work, but Slow is kind of infallible, it always works. So one Slow, we can have it. We can tailor our list. If we expect to fight a lot of crowds, more Fireballs. If we expect to fight a single powerful enemy, less Fireballs, more Slow. This is, as usual, the crux of prepared spellcasters. You kind of need to know what you're going to face. The more you know what you're going to face, the better the prepared spellcaster is. The less you know, the worse your list is going to play. So in a way, we are kind of seeing the worst possible list of our spellcaster. Okay, we get a school spell, as I said. For this one, we're just going to prepare our Animate Dead, both in our school slot and in our blended slot. So we have a couple of casts of Animate Dead, potentially 3 with our bonded item. If you feel like summons are working very well, you can have it at 3 slots or even 4. How much you commit to the summon strategy depends on the circumstances, and this is another strength of the prepared spellcaster, that they can change what their spell selection looks like day by day. Of course, a sorcerer would just learn these spells and be able to choose not just day by day, but second by second how to spend their spell slots. Once you have locked your daily preparation, you, for that day, are done. Our advantage, though, compared with the sorcerer, is that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 with bonded item, level 3 spells at level 6. That is absolutely crazy. We must not forget also that we have taken the witch archetype, so we gained an extra cantrip, and I'm going to take a utility cantrip in the form of message, and then we can kind of recover a bit our one of the 2 first level spells that we used for spell blending. I'm not going to stress it out too much. Let's take fear, but again, this is a flex slot. You feel like you're going to need Featherfall, prepare Featherfall. You feel like you're going to need to disguise yourself, take illusory disguise or even illusory object to create cover. It's just usual prepared spellcasters fare. And for our level 2 slots, another cast of invisibility seems appropriate. Okay, with this we have ended our level 6 snapshot. Let's move up 5 levels and go to level 11. At level 11 we can start by blending our low level spells. We can blend a couple of level 2 spells, including our school spell, and a couple of level 3 spell to get extra level 4 and extra level 5 spell slots. And then we can take our extra level 4 spell slot, the blended one, and the school spell, and blend those to get an extra level 6 spell slot. Nowhere does it say that we cannot use a blended spell slot and blend it with another slot to get higher level slots. And indeed, Path Builder allows you to do it as it should. So it's level 11. A sorcerer will have 3 level 6 spells. We have 4 plus 1 from the arcane bond. That makes it 5. So I think this is the true power of our character, being able to concentrate high level spell slots. Let's go back to the lower level spell slots. Fireball at level 3 once we are level 11 is no longer a good idea. But what is always a good idea is spamming slow. When in doubt, spam slow. And at level 4 I spent like 15 minutes trying to figure out how invisibility works with summons. Let's just solve the issue by preparing the heightened version of invisibility. This doesn't last 10 minutes, it lasts only 1 minute, but now we can do whatever we want while invisible without breaking the invisibility. So now we can actually be the invisible summoner and have our undead summons do our bidding. I feel like this is such a core part of our strategy, and it solves very well the problem of our survivability, that dedicating all our level 4 spell slots to this is pretty reasonable. It might be a bit of an exaggeration, but at level 10 we unlocked Scroll Savant, and therefore we can gain 2 extra spell slots. They are technically scrolls, but they function similarly to spell slots, so I'm going to put them here. I misspoke early on. It's not the crafting proficiency that gives you extra slots, it's the arcane spell DC proficiency which increases them. So right now we don't have 3 scrolls, we have just 2. So we will gain 2 extra spell slots. Let's add them. And we can prepare a nice combat buff in the form of Enlarge to make a creature huge, give them a bonus to reach and melee damage. Pretty nice to buff our marshals. And to prepare an actual level 4 spell, I think Dimension Door, you know, the Get Out of Trouble card, is kind of useful to have ready. For level 5, a bit of AoE control, and certainly a very iconic spell for a Necromancer would be Black Tentacles. Keep in mind that this is a 3-action spell, so if we want to cast Black Tentacles and sustain our summon, we might want to use Cackle. Alternatively, if we cast our summon, maybe we don't want to cast more higher level spell slots. We already committed a high level spell slot to that combat, so maybe the fact that this is also 3 actions is not that big of a problem. This is something we might fall back to when we don't want to use our summons, because we feel they would not be effective, or maybe we feel like we don't need them right now. So a couple of those spells because they're very iconic, and then some control in the form of Wall of Stone. We can prepare a Necromancy spell, and here I will prepare a Heightened Enervation. This is a line spell which deals persistent negative damage and heightens pretty well. It also applies Drained on a failure, so this is also a very iconic spell for a Necromancer. And for our blended spell, Wall of Stone is very good, so I'm going to prepare another copy of it. Again, I'm preparing these spells while blind. If you know what you're going up against, you can change this setup freely. For level 6, Black Tentacles is okay damage-wise, but we can do better, and as always, summons are not very good at dealing damage. So let's take a premium damage dealing spell in the form of Chain Lightning, and let's take it twice actually. For our school and blended spells, as usual, we are going to take a couple of Animate Dead. How is Animate Dead looking now that we are in the mid-levels? We saw it in the early levels. So when we cast this at level 6, we can summon up to level 7 undead. So we have the option to summon our Cyclops zombie, which is our big chunky boy, still slowed, but it has 160 HP and immunity to all the usual undead things. We can summon Greater Shadows. It has half the HP of the zombie, a bit more armor class, and the ability to inflict the enfeebled condition. It actually inflicts enfeebled 2, which is pretty nice. Of course, we should not sleep on level 6 undead either. We have, for example, the Revenant, who has the Baleful Shriek ability. They are not slowed, so you can use this the turn you summon them. And this is a 60-foot burst, which is not party friendly, so be mindful. And the creatures who are subjected to this scream are frightened 2 on a success. And if they fail, the DC is not that great, but if they fail, they are also paralyzed for 1 round, so pretty nice effect to have access to if you're fighting low will saving throws enemies. This might be appealing. And since, as I said, I have a soft spot for zombies, the Zombie Hulk also has 160 HP. They are still slowed, but they have access to a swing action, which targets up to 2 foes, so soft AoE. Again, something that you might want to consider. So this is it for our wizard spells. Our witch spell gained just 1 extra level. We are up to level 3. And again, when in doubt, we pick slow. We also have the Cathartic Mage dedication, so that's 3 extra spell slots, and a cantrip. For the Cathartic Mage, I had originally taken Arcana to double down on the spell casting. However, one thing that I had not noticed is that it's Charisma that fuels the Cathartic Mage, not Intelligence, unlike the Witch. So we would have a lower DC even if we pick Arcana. So at this point, I'm going to change our Cathartic Mage tradition to something else. So our purpose is not to double down on our spells anymore, but to expand our spell selection. So for our cantrips, we can take Guidance. This gives a +1 roll to a creature, and it's pretty good on summons, because even if they are temporarily immune, they don't really care, because they are going to disappear anyway. So you can use this carefree on your summons. For our level 1 spells, we can pick a buff like Long Strider for the extra movement. For our level 2, again, getting out of trouble by climbing on ceilings with Spider Climb might be useful. And at level 3, another control effect which does not care about our spell DC is Wall of Water that might protect us from ranged attacks. We can cast spells through it if we want to. As you can see, since we have chosen the primal DC and we have low charisma modifier, our attack modifier and saving throw DC is very low when compared to the witch, which is equal to that of the wizard. This wraps up our level 11. Let's move to the late game and see what our build looks like at level 16. As before, we blend our lower level spell slots. Level 6, level 5, level 6. I feel like the black tentacles at level 5, once we are level 16, are no longer that effective. Probably it's better to just convert them to walls of stone. Same is true for Chain Lightning. We want our highest level spell slots to be dealing damage, but at level 6 we can cast Heightened Slow for AoE Action Drain. Very powerful and again quite iconic for a Necromancer. So if the enemy has less actions, and maybe they're wasting some of them to chase around our summons or our illusionary summons, then we can be a pretty effective controller through somewhat unconventional means. Although we should not deceive ourselves, it's not the summoning part that's doing the trick, it's still the slow spell. But a third action sustain is a very good third action to couple with these slow spells. Speaking of controlling the flow of combat, at level 7 we can heighten haste to have it target up to 6 creatures. Now, for us, it is particularly good because this is probably going to work on our summons unless we are in a 6-party team. But we might be in a 4-party adventuring team and we might be able to target with this effect, or there might be some players that don't really benefit from the extra action. And so we can target with our summons with haste instead. And since summons can be affected by slow, then it's only fair that they would be affected by haste. This can solve our zombie problem. Keep in mind that on the zombie, it's particularly good because they don't get a haste action, which is an action they can only use to stride and strike. The hasted condition would counter the slowed condition, so they would be able to use 2 actions. So they can use a 2-action activity if they have access to it, or they can use just any second action, not necessarily a strike or a stride. So this is obviously very good, and we want many of these haste spells. So much so that I think we might just prepare all hastes here, except for the school spell, and feel good about it. However, here I'm going to prepare also a heightened forceful hand, which at this level, level 7, can also grasp. So again, it's a control effect to drain away the actions of the enemy, and this stacks with slow. It is also technically a summon, so the enemy might have to deal with our pesky zombies bothering them, and then they are slowed, and then they have the hand which is grappling them and taking away all their actions, and their turns become very ineffective with this character. Let's take our necromancy spell. Let's take an actual 7th level spell. Eclipse Burst is a pretty good damage. It, I think, out damages Chain Lightning if you can target living creatures, which is probably going to happen pretty often. This is not as party friendly as Chain Lightning. It is, however, very iconic for such a powerful necromancer as we currently are. So this huge explosion of cold and negative damage is exactly the kind of stuff that you would expect a necromancer to do. So much so, actually, that I'm going to prepare 2 of these, although haste is very tempting here. And finally, we go to our level 8 spell slots. Let's get Animate Dead out of the way. A couple of these as always. Again, more or less depending on how effective you found this spell so far. And here you can take more Eclipse Burst. I will still take Chain Lightning though, because of the way this is party friendly. So it's probably still the superior option. We have gained the Patron's Breath feats, so we can get double our spells. Again, not knowing what we're going to face, I'm just going to double down on the previous selections where that's relevant. So more Fear, more Invisibility, more Slows. At level 4, I am also going to prepare a couple of Dimension Door to run away, a Wall of Stone at level 5, and another Heightened Slow at level 6, which is just as powerful as our Wizard Slow. For the Cathartic Mage, at level 4, we have a better fly spell in the form of Airwalk. So much so that I'm going to prepare a couple of times, one at level 5 heightened as well. And at level 6, I think we can take a defensive option in the form of heightened Stone Skin, which gives us damage resistance 10 to physical damage. We could cast it on a summon to increase its survivability. It seems like putting too many eggs in a bad basket though, so this is probably better on yourself, or even better on a marshal who takes a lot of hits to their face. Let us not forget our Bones Scrolls, finally. We can upgrade those from level 4 to level 6, because we can cast up to level 8 spells. And we have 3 now, because our proficiency has gone up to Master. Again, pick your favorite. Do you want more heightened slows? You can do those. I think control-wise, also thanks to the summon, we are fine. We can take a bit of disposable Chain Lightning, you know, for when you want to do a bit more damage than a cantrip, but it's not really that important to obliterate everything in the area, just some cheap Chain Lightning to throw around. And this is all for level 16. So let's conclude our build by looking at our Necromancer at level 20. All the low-level options up to level 6 remain the same. The blended slot and school slot at level 7 get blended to level 9. And at level 20, just like at level 1, is where our Arcane Thesis is starting to falter, because we cannot do spell manipulation shenanigans with level 10 spells. As you can see, we can only heighten 8th level spells up to level 9. So do we want to trade 2 level 8 spells for a level 9 spell? Probably not. Unfortunately, the reason why we can't do that is that level 10 spells cannot specifically be affected by effects and abilities that allows you to get more of those. The only exception is the level 20 capstone feat, which gives you another one. So no arcane bond for the 10th level spells, no spell blending for 10th level spells. There is nothing to be done. You just get 1 or 2 if you take the capstone feat. And this is why, again, it's particularly awful. I'm still going to prepare it. I'm going to commit to my Necromancer theme. So I'm still going to prepare the Animate Dead at level 10. But at level 10, this is competing with Wish. And what are our level 10 summons that are competing with Wish? Let's just take a look at them right now. As you can see here, these are level 15 monsters. Let's take our damage-dealing skeleton, the Shren Grave Knight. This has a plus 31 attack, which seems like a lot, but at level 20, a marshal is going to laugh at that. It doesn't really deal that much damage. It has an instant kill ability, but we cannot use it because it requires 3 actions. And it has an AoE cone ability, which deals a bit of damage. Again, we could just heighten a Chain Lightning at level 10 and it would do more damage than that. So that's a bit sad. It has 300 HP, a bit of armor class. It has a reaction, but it cannot use it because it's a summon. Not that good. Let's look at something else. Let's look at a Skyver. That's 330 HP. Again, it can cast a bunch of divine spells. So you can cast harm as a wizard through this summon. Pretty good. As we get to higher levels, we get access to undead who can cast spells. And these are usually divine spells like harm, which we cannot use. So this can self-heal, it can cast true seeing, invisibility, detect magic. You know, many of these spells we were able to cast a long while ago. 7th level harm at level 20, it's not that mind-breaking, but, you know, it's still better than nothing. It can heal itself, if nothing else, with this spell. It has a gaze ability which can drain. The will saving DC is not that exceptional. It applies enfeebled, and its strikes still are not that exceptional. It also has an aura, which affects living creatures unless you were able to turn yourself into a lich, which as a necromancer you might be able to, but unless your entire party is undead, this will affect the party as well. And it deals a bit of damage and enfeebles and pulls creatures toward the Skyver. It's not bad. Like, of course you can have fun in slaughtering entire villages with this as a necromancer. Is this as good as Wish? Hell no, not even close. And at this point I feel like our summon is really falling off. We might even use a 9th level spell for the summon. And in fact, let's prepare a heightened Animate Dead, because at this point the summons are really a flexible utility slot. Damage-wise, you know, you can still do damage comparable to the second strike of a pet. It's not completely useless, but asking a 10th level spell slot for this is a big ask. We got a bit ahead of ourselves. We forgot about 9th level spells. I'm still going to keep heightened Chain Lightnings at level 8. And for level 9, this is another thing that liches like to do, since we might want to use our powerful undead to destroy villages, but you know, a good old-fashioned Meteor Swarm also accomplishes kind of the same thing. Once they defeated the big, bad, evil monster, we just laugh at them and annihilate them with meteors. And for our blended spell, let's take a buff, which gives us a reaction, which is very powerful, and that buff is Foresight. Our scrolls are also now up to level 8, and there's 4 of them, so we can get up to 4 extra level 8 quote-unquote spells. We can take stuff like Disappearance, which is super uber invisibility, since we like being invisible and having the undead do the dirty work for us. We can take single target control spells like Maze. Our Archetype Witch has gone up to legendary. We can get extra walls. We can get the Tongues spell to be able to talk with everyone. Might be useful. Or another wall spell, more heightened slows, another Forceful Hand, and you can take an extra Maze or an extra Disappearance. For the Cathartic Mage, we can get a bit of healing. This works on undead as well, so Regenerate can heal ourselves if we become liches. Or maybe our tanky undead, they are tanky only if we are facing low-level trash. And then at level 8, a nice heightened heal for the rest of our party or for ourselves if we are not undead. If everyone is undead, we can just take a heightened regenerate and that would be fine. And this is all for the spell snapshot. So how does this spell list look throughout its evolution as the character progresses? This looks very fun to play, especially because of the summoning and especially because of how the wizard class through spell blending can enable plenty of this summoning, of this flexible, versatile and fun spell. Since we are preparing these spells in a vacuum without knowing what we're going to face, there is a lot of repetitions of spells that I feel safe I would be able to cast basically in any situations. So spells that support our kind of standard strategy of hiding around, controlling the battlefield, locking enemies together with powerful undead and have them pummel them into oblivion, or use the undead for support effect to delay mobs or distract the boss. So with this being said, let's go to the final thoughts for the wizard. The most striking thing about the wizard spell list, especially when compared with the previous video Sorcerer, is how it seems that in Pathfinder 2nd edition, the wizard and the sorcerer kind of exchanged roles. So the sorcerer paradoxically has access to more Swiss Army knife kind of spellcasting, thanks to the high number of spells that they can learn and thanks to signature spells in particular. They can afford to always have in their sleeve a circumstantial spell that the wizard might theoretically know, but will only prepare if they know they're actually going to need it. Otherwise, they wouldn't waste a spell slot for that. And so since I think that in your average campaign, the situations where you are blundering into an empty room without knowing what's in there are more frequent than the situations where you know exactly what's going to happen and you've got a perfect plan for your adventuring day, I think the sorcerer wins out in terms of versatility. I don't know if I would say the same if I had taken a spell substitution wizard. Still, that kind of thesis lends itself to out-of-combat utility. And I still think that in combat utility, so those times where you get hit with an invisible creature and you're panicking because you haven't prepared glitter dust or see invisibility, well, the sorcerer will probably have you covered more often than the wizard. This is the impression I'm getting from these lists. On the other hand, what the wizard does have is the ability to spam spells more so than the sorcerer. And thanks to things like spell penetration and drain bonded item, I think a very effective wizard would be a blaster wizard that maybe take a sorcerer dedication for dangerous sorcery and uses all their high level spells for fireballs, chain lightnings, damage dealing effects. You could also do that on the control side of things, so have a bunch of slows or a bunch of illusions and enchantments. But if you go the spell blending way, and if you go the specialist way, which together with spell blending we saw in this character is quite effective, then you basically are led to behaving like a sorcerer, to picking a particular strategy and trying to excel at it while narrowing down your other options. Of course, both the wizard and the sorcerer have access to scrolls, they have access to wands, and your utility should probably take this into account. So once you factor this as well, the distance between the two classes is a bit bridged. Personally, I think I will give the crown for the spellcaster still to the sorcerer, just because charisma, I think, is a better stat than intelligence in Pathfinder 2nd edition. And I also think that charisma enables the sorcerer to pick archetypes that complement their abilities better than intelligence does that for the wizard. So the champion dedication for the sorcerer is just amazingly good. The wizard, yes, they can take sentinel, it doesn't feel as good. Regardless of that, just like in 5th edition, I would say that the wizard is the king of spellcasters over the sorcerer, but I would still recommend playing a sorcerer if you like that class. and there are plenty of people who are going to prefer every day of the week playing a sorcerer over a wizard, I'm also sure that there is a place for the wizard in the game. I'm sure that there will be fans of the wizard, and there are players for whom the wizard is the right class over the sorcerer. I don't think that the difference in power between the two classes is significant enough to warrant never picking a wizard and saying something like, if you want to play an arcane spellcaster, just play a sorcerer and never play a wizard. This is blatantly false, and I hope that by building this character and showing the things that they can do, even as a new player, this can help convince some people a bit on the fence about the wizard that the class can still perform in a satisfactory fashion despite their shortcomings. Another big advantage that comes to mind that the sorcerer has over the wizard is that a sorcerer kind of builds itself as a character, whereas the wizard requires more thought. Both classes are not simple to build, but the sorcerer is clearly simpler. And this can be an advantage for the sorcerer, or it can be a disadvantage depending on the type of player that you are. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you will tell me in the comments about how wrong I am about the wizard, how they are actually the best class in the game, and how your wizard is way better than the one I built. And regardless, I thank you all very much for listening, and I'll see you all in the next one.